Hello and welcome back to my channel. Now this is the Peugeot 408, a car that I have been itching to drive since I first saw this car in a studio many months ago. Now that video has been my best performing video on my YouTube channel.
Oh my God!
So it's clear people out there and people like you at home are interested in the 408. So when the call came from Peugeot UK asking if I'd like to have a go in one, of course, the answer was a big fat yes. Coming up now is exactly what I think of the new 408. But before we dive in, if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to my channel for lots more reviews like this and all sorts of automotive content. Right then, let's crack on with it. In my walk around video, it's an in-depth look at the styling, the interior of this car, and I'm not going to repeat all of that. You can watch all of that again by clicking in the top right of this screen for that video. But there are a couple of things I'd like to talk about, and that is where this 408 came from. About 7 years ago, 2015, around then, Peugeot said to its designers, look, go away, have free rein, go ahead and do whatever you like. Now that's pretty unusual for Peugeot. The last time they said that to their designers was for a two-door coupe, and the end result was the RCZ. And this 408, of course, it's not as dramatic as that RCZ, but there is a whiff of kind of French kind of eccentricity. Look, to hell with everything, we're just going to create a really interestingly designed car. Styling is always subjective, but I think this 408 is gorgeous. I'm not the first to notice that there's a hint of Lamborghini Urus in the rear three-quarter, but the point remains, this is a seriously good-looking and upmarket feeling car. Peugeot has cleverly combined the elegance of a fastback with the on-trend styling of a crossover, namely the raised ride height. And while I think its bigger brother, the 508 Saloon, is even better looking, I'm just glad this 408 isn't another uninspiring SUV. Now the 408 is based on Stellantis's EMP2 V3 platform. Sorry to be really geeky about cars there, but it's important because that platform is also shared with the Citroen C5 X. And you can tell there are sort of similarities. Both are similar in the sense that the designs of the car very much go against the grain, and they're both targeted to appealing to conquest buyers, people who have never considered a Peugeot or a Citroen before. Unlike the C5 X though, the engine range is a little bit different. With the 408, there's a 1.2 litre 3-cylinder petrol and there's two plug-in hybrids. It's a 1.6 litre petrol engine, is the first one, and that has 180 brake horsepower, and the second one has 225 horsepower. Now if you're familiar with the Stellantis model range, those engines appear in all sorts of product. The 180 appears in the Peugeot 308 hybrid, the 225 variant has just been revealed in the Vauxhall Astra GSE, which I've just reviewed that car, and you can click in the top right hand corner for that review. So what do I think then to this 408? Well, actually, it's really quite surprised me. And the main reason for it surprising me is how comfortable this car is. Now the Citroen C5 X, for example, that car is all about comfort. It's all about cosseting the people on board. It's got fancy advanced comfort suspension. It's got extra squidgy seats with extra foam padding in them. And that car just lollops around on the road, very much like Citroens of old. This, well, it's not quite as comfortable as that car, but it's a far more comfortable than I thought it was going to be. I was expecting this car to be set up in quite a sporty fashion. I thought the ride would be on the stiff and firm side, and the whole car would have a bit of an enthusiastic kind of feeling to it. But it doesn't actually. Now, not only is this car comfortable, it is also extremely quiet. Now, of course, we've got the plug-in hybrid version here. There are a couple of different driving modes, as you'd expect. I'm in hybrid mode at the moment, which does, as you'd expect, it flips between petrol and electric power when it sees fit. Yada, yada, yada. I say this all the time in videos. And there's also an electric mode, a pure electric mode, and there's a sport mode, which of course sharpens the driving experience up. So naturally, when you flip between petrol and electric, the car is naturally going to be quiet. But that's not the reason why I find this car very quiet. It's just that the road noise is really well suppressed in here. Part of that is the fit and finish in here. I mean, this car is so well made. The material quality in here is something else. I mean, Peugeot are really knocking it out the park these days for material quality on the inside. This car has also got insulating glass, sound acoustic glass as well. It just means you just glide along with a minimal amount of noise. Even on the motorway, which I tried out earlier on, it just is whisper quiet. I mean, sitting here, driving along this road at this very moment in time, you could be forgiven for thinking you're in a premium car. I mean, the dashboard looks fantastic. There's a level of tech in here which is easily comparable to the Germans, if not better in some respects. And it's quiet, hushed and refined. And because you've got 225 horsepower under your feet, it's pretty quick too. It's pretty quick in a straight line in sport mode and when the petrol engine and electric motor are at their optimum. 0 to 62 miles an hour takes 7.8 seconds claimed, but it feels quicker than that. But in all honesty, the less powerful 180 horsepower version isn't all that much slower. Both cough out just 26 grams per kilometre and have a claimed 40-mile electric range, which can be topped up via the plug or by using the car's engine. Connect to a wall box and it'll take 3.5 hours to charge up, or spend an extra £400 and Peugeot will fit a 7.4 kilowatt onboard charger, slashing the charging time to 1 hour and 40 minutes. The other thing I like is the driving position. Now, it's quite curious this actually, because this isn't an out-and-out SUV. If you want an SUV, you go for a Peugeot 3008, for example. And the 408 only sits 188mm high off the road. And yet you sit here and it does feel a little bit like an SUV. You do sort of sit up just a little bit higher than you were expecting. And yet the driving position itself, this feels like a saloon car. My knees are sort of above my hips here, whereas in an SUV you tend to sit a little bit higher and sort of more down on the controls. Here, I'm sort of sitting a little bit more like a saloon car or a hatchback, and it's got a bit more of a dynamic feeling. It's a bit of an odd sensation actually. Despite having 225 horses under the bonnet and a sporty driving position, the 408 isn't all that sporty to drive. While the ride comfort is firmer than the Citroen C5 X, the 408 is still rather soft and it leans through the corners. A Cupra Formentor or a Volkswagen Arteon are more fun to drive. Now, we can't talk about the driving position without talking about the small Peugeot steering wheel. Now, you're probably expecting me to say it's awful, I can't see the dials, what were Peugeot thinking? They haven't learnt their lesson from other applications of this steering wheel in like the 208, the 308, the 3008, for example. I'm not going to say that actually. Whilst I do have to have the steering wheel set lower than I would usually have it so that I can see the dials up there, it's the kind of thing that I think we motoring journalists moan about, because for most people they like to sit up high and have the steering wheel quite low, and if you have your seating position like that, you'll easily be able to see the dials, and there is no doubt about it. Curiously, this small steering wheel does make this car feel a little bit more sporty to drive. It's strange really, because like I've just alluded to, this is not a dynamically set up car, and yet this small steering wheel does give a kind of slightly more sporty feeling to the way it goes round corners. It's quite an odd thing really. Right, we've got to talk about the tech on board. We've got a wireless charging pad here. I love this design of centre console. I think it looks tremendous. Above that, we've got two different touch screens. The upper one is your usual infotainment system. This system itself, I mean, Peugeot have worked hard on this over the past few years, and it is a lot better. The screen itself is like a glass screen. It does sort of feel a bit sort of smartphone-ish. I do feel though that some of the menus, they're a little bit difficult to navigate. There's quite a few sub-menus, and quite a lot of the car's functions are controlled through that, and I just find it slightly, when you're driving, a little bit difficult to use, but you could say that for lots of cars' infotainment systems these days. But Peugeot has tried to improve things with this second screen here. Now you've got a row of different icons. You can choose which icons you like. And it does make life a little bit easier, actually. And then beneath that, you've got a row of physical controls for the really major stuff like climate and what have you. In front of you, all cars get this Peugeot iCockpit, as Peugeots have for quite some time now. In this car, we've got the 3D setup, so it's quite difficult to show on camera. It's quite difficult to explain, but I'm going to give it a go. So you've got your usual dials, and yet sort of in front of those, the speed and like the rev counter, or the plug-in hybrid equivalent of a rev counter, sort of floats in front of those dials. It's quite an odd sensation. I don't think it's strictly necessary, really. I think it's a bit gimmicky, but it is a nice thing to have, and it does give this car just a little bit, well, it just adds to this car's generally pretty impressive premium feel. Right then, important question. Would I buy a Peugeot 408? Well, if I were the kind of person who is turned off by saloon cars, perhaps I think they're just a little bit too dull, and I really don't like the idea of having an SUV, I would definitely consider the 408. In all honesty, I would actually go for something like the Citroen C5 X, but that's my personal view because I happen to like big, wafty and comfortable Citroens. I do happen to really like this 408. It drives well, it's nice and comfortable, the level of fit and finish is great, the tech is pretty good, it's not the best, but it's more than good enough. It feels aspirational and premium and expensive, and most importantly of all, it feels just a little bit different. And in these days of SUVs that all seem identical, when something comes along that at least feels on the surface to be a little bit different, I think it's something to be celebrated. I could easily see this Peugeot stealing some Mercedes, BMW and Audi customers.